Welcome to Marin Voices and Views. With Lawrence A. Strick, I'm Peter B. Collins. In our second segment in a few minutes, we'll meet Len Rifkind, a local attorney and member of the City Council in Larkspur.
First, Peter, Marc Levine is back on our program. Marc was newly elected assemblyman for Marin and Sonoma County. He had served on the City Council here in San Rafael. In the November election, he defeated Michael Allen. Marc, thanks for coming back.
I'm grateful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Good to see you.
Marc, I got to tell you, you surprised a lot of people with your victory back in November. I think especially Speaker Perez, who spent almost $2 million on the other guy. Do you think the message of the voters was sent to the Speaker, or what lessons do we learn from that?
It was an amazing victory, and I'm grateful for the voters for, really figuring out the election for themselves. I was outspent greater than 5-1 by some counts, and yet I won by almost 5,000 votes. If you look at elections across the state, there were at least a dozen elections where the resources the candidates had were much more even, and yet the margins of victory were closer than the margin that I had in November. So I think the message was sent to Sacramento that local voters wanted to choose their own representative, and I've been warmly received in Sacramento since Election Day.
Marc, I think you know that I did some work on the Allen campaign, and I have to say it's clear that the avalanche of mailers and the attack ads that came from allied groups backfired. I know many people who didn't know much about you, but they voted for you because they were turned off by the Allen campaign, which is run from Sacramento by the Speaker and a consultant named John Whitehurst. Was there a point in the campaign where you could feel or you knew that the tide had turned in your favor?
I always ran every day as though I needed to earn votes from the moment I woke up. And when I looked at our polling, our polling was consistent from September through to the independent polling that people would whisper about through October. And on election night, the votes that came in early were votes that were for me, with me in the lead, but consistent throughout the night as new returns came in. And so the negative campaign that backfired so badly didn't even eat into the lead that I had with the early voters that voted absentee in the beginning of October as soon as those vote-by-mail ballots came out. Mm-hmm. Voters in Marin County are also the highest educated, we are the highest educated county in the state of California. They can get information themselves about the issues of the day. They did not rely on mail as far as who they should be voting for. They didn't even rely on endorsements from other Democrats or the Democratic Party. They got the information themselves and provided their own analysis, which I think helped in my election, because they identified with my message of making sure that we had a local voice and perspective in Sacramento.
So you're in Sacramento, Democratic majority, probably going to be a Democratic supermajority in both houses in the next couple of weeks.
It actually already is. So the Senate just recaptured its supermajority in an election this week, a special election in Southern California, and we continue to retain a supermajority in the Assembly as well.
So what's the tone in Sacramento? What's going on, and what can we expect good coming out of this from a Democratic point of view?
Well, election reforms have taken hold in this state in a couple of ways. There was independent redistricting. There was also the top two primary. And the result was, in addition to a number of things, both a Democratic supermajority in both houses, but also the gain of seats in places that don't normally vote Democratic. We may have had some help from President Obama, which helped bring out more voters. But even in some districts where more Republicans voted, in the Antelope Valley, for example, we had a Democratic victory, a surprise. We did not know that Assemblymember Fox was victorious until the Sunday, the very day before we were sworn in December 3rd. And so we've got some Democrats that aren't your typical Bay Area or coastal Democrats that we're used to as part of our caucus. And I'm fascinated to see how this impacts our caucus in that we want to continue to grow it and protect the supermajority. But how do we not put some of those new members of the caucus at risk? And that's a conversation that's taking place right now.
Mark, a couple of questions about process. Since the fiscal problems really got deep about 5-7 years ago, only a handful of people have been involved in the budget process, the leaders of each house working with the governor. Now that things have settled down a bit and we're out of a crisis mode, are we going to return to the process where you, as a member through the committee system, gets to really be involved in the development of the budget? Or is this going to remain a top-down effort that's in the control of really just the top leadership?
Well, it's an incredibly insightful point that you just made. It is in the hands of a few, and the budget process as it goes through committee is not the budget that ultimately is adopted. And that's been the record for a number of years. We're seeing this debate be played out, for example, in the change of the school funding formula. So will that be something that goes through a policy committee, through the Assembly Education Committee, for example, or will this be in a budget trailer bill? And there are a number of items just like this that perhaps will end up in trailer bills yet again. And I think from the Assembly's perspective, from my perspective as a member, we want these bills to be going through policy committees.
What's a trailer bill?
A trailer bill, another good question. So we pass a budget, hopefully before the deadline, and then there are probably a dozen bills that come along with that budget. It'd be great if it came before deadline as well, and there was time for a lot of open debate. In the last year, those trailer bills came after the budget deadline, and after the budget itself was passed, these trailer bills enable the spending and the mechanisms for that spending that the budget proposes.
I noticed that a couple of your colleagues have proposed a 3-day rule. That is to say that any bill that's voted upon has to be published or printed so that the Assembly member can read it. Do you support that?
I think it's a very good idea. So in addition to wanting to have things aired out and debated in a policy committee, how do we make sure that those who are affected by these policies have an opportunity to weigh in on how they'll be impacted? And you can think of any number of constituents or groups that would be concerned about bills. And so trailer bills aren't the ones that normally catch the eye or attention as much as what's called a gut and amend bill, where you take a bill that's been passed through a policy committee, even through a chamber. It's maybe over on the other side in the Senate, from my perspective, and they just amend all the language out and put something else in without another policy hearing, and that's something that we need to argue to continue to do, particularly as these are bills that perhaps didn't get the hearing that they needed to have in the House of Origination.
Mark, you've been very busy. I have a list here of 21 bills that you've authored, and you're co-sponsor on a number of others. Two of them that have gotten attention are statewide versions of Marin legislation. First, the plastic bag ban, which is now in effect in the county, but not, for example, in the city of San Rafael. What's the response to your proposal to expand this statewide?
Well, there's been a lot of interest in it. We now have over 60 jurisdictions that have a ban of some type in California, and yet there's not any uniformity throughout the state. And of course, there are many cities who are waiting on the sidelines, very concerned about threats of lawsuit, who do want to enact bans. So there's great interest in such a statewide law, and hopefully we'll be able to advance it. It's been difficult to get out of the legislature, unfortunately. In the past, we've been able to move them out of the Assembly. We have not been able to do the same thing in the Senate. This is a long-term conversation we need to continue to have this year and, if necessary, in future years. But it's worked incredibly well in the jurisdictions that have adopted the bans. We know that here in Marin. Mm-hmm. And it's, in fact, changed the behavior and operation of a number of other markets who aren't affected by such ordinances, who have decided on their own to just switch to paper and not have plastic.
I'd like to see an amendment that requires the stores to post a sign that says "Got bags."
Yeah.
Because they're in the car, but I forget to take them in.
That's right. Every time you leave the house, you have to remember to bring your reusable bag, and then when you leave your car, remember to pick it out of the trunk on the way in. When we want to shift, which is what we want to do, shift behavior towards using reusable bags, and this is a way to start.
Speaking of banning things,
Yeah.
San Rafael passed a smoking ban in apartment and condo complexes. One of your 21 bills would impose that on a statewide basis. It only covers tobacco products. It doesn't cover medical marijuana, so there's no conflict there. And I think the IJ recently had a...
It's a Chronicle cartoon.
Oh, it's Chronicle cartoon. Chronicle cartoon the other day. But you're going to be allowed to smoke in designated areas. Some people are calling that a smoking cage. Is your bill being mischaracterized, and is that okay with you, so long as it gets some legs, so to speak? And what do you think ultimately will happen with the bill and getting it in place?
Well, first of all, a great deal of legislation that doesn't ban anything.
Okay.
But I think this is, from a public health perspective, one of the most important conversations we can have in our state. When we send our children to school, they learn in a smoke-free environment. We go to work with workplace protections to make sure that work is smoke-free. But where we should feel safest, in our own homes, when we go to sleep at night, when someone in an apartment building lights up, we all smoke with them. We know that cancer is caused by secondhand smoke. The Surgeon General said that there is no safe contact with secondhand smoke, and yet a change in behavior on the part of smokers is going to be one of the most difficult battles I'll face this year. With regard to medical marijuana, I'm much more concerned with cancer-causing tobacco secondhand smoke than cancer-easing medical marijuana. And so this will be something that we will continue to work hard on throughout this year, make sure people are aware, if they're not, of how dangerous secondhand smoke is. 82% of California renters would prefer to live in a smoke-free environment. 4.6 to 4.9 Californians, according to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, live in a place where they are in an apartment or condo where they do get contact with secondhand smoke. So we can change millions of lives.
I want to ask you one question on that. I know it's been subject to cartoons and it's been in national media, but when you put a bill out there that's looking at big tobacco, they come after you.
Yeah.
What's going on with that?
You've got a number of allies of big tobacco, or villains, as I would prefer to call them, that find ways to put pressure on different interest groups to say, you don't want to have this. And so maybe it's associations for landlords, even groups that purport to represent those who live in poverty, saying that they're against this, as though we'd be infringing more on the rights of poor smokers than the rights on those who are poor who cannot move to a place that would be smoke-free. And so I weigh in on the side of that working mom with kids who can't find another place to live, but doesn't want to feel guilty that she puts her daughter to sleep in a place where she's smelling secondhand smoke. That's where I am. I'm not on the side of, the socioeconomically disadvantaged smoker. And so I think that there are some very bright lines in this debate, and I know where I fall.
Mark, I was very pleased to see that you've authored a bill to require permits for oil and gas drilling using fracking. It's called hydraulic fracturing. And experts that I've talked to say the potential benefits of fracking are wildly overstated, while groundwater poisoning and methane leaks are seriously understated. Your bill requires permits for fracking, but it doesn't mandate notice to neighbors or others affected who might share the same water source, for example. Tell me how you framed it and what the limits are of this legislation.
Well, first of all, it actually does require notice
I didn't see that
to
in the
local
bill.
water boards, in fact.
Okay.
It also changes the Department of Conservation's mandate, which is to do two things: protect public health, and two, maximize extraction of natural resources. And we don't really see a way for those two missions to live, to coexist. And so we would take away the one that's maximizing the extraction of resources. The other one is, of course, how many fracked wells exist in California? That's an important question I think a lot of us want to know. The answer is we don't know, because there's no requirement to tell the state of California if you're engaging in fracking, or in fact any well stimulation technique. And so there are other techniques beyond fracking that we're beginning to look at as well. The other one, of course, that from a city perspective, coming off of a council where for anyone that wants a permit, you actually charge them to review their work. The state doesn't do that right now. There's if you just want to drill a well for oil, no fracking, it's a 10-day permit process. There's no charge to it. And if you don't hear back in 10 days, it's presumed approved.
Right.
Presumed approved. So we end that as well. And then we create a whole process as well on the fracking. The most important point, I think, to the bill is that we actually ask the oil companies to prove what they say, which is that it's safe. So if you say it's safe, prove it.
So you're switching the burden on them.
That's right, exactly.
Marc Levine, it's a real pleasure to see you today. Thanks for your work in Sacramento, and we'd like to catch up with you again later this year.
Peter, Larry, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Good to see you.
Len Rifkind is a Marin native with a law practice focused on housing and land use issues. He's a past president of the Marin County Bar Association and has served on many community boards. He was elected to the Larkspur City Council in 2009. Welcome, Len.
Thank you for inviting me.
I'm glad you're here. Now, city councils in Central Marin have been very vocal about the long-term housing plan being developed by ABAG. Your neighbors in Corte Madera resigned from ABAG. That's the Association of Bay Area Governments. Tell me what your view is of the housing needs in Larkspur in particular and the ABAG planning process, because it's getting a lot of flack and some of it is attributed to NIMBY types, the not in my backyard.
Thanks for that question. It's actually a complicated answer. So I'll give you what my personal opinion is. I'm in favor of more housing. I think that we need more housing for all, the entire spectrum of economic, people's economic ability to live here. And if this is the way Marin County is structured right now with such limited land that's available for development, you have to be fairly affluent in order to live here or to have housing here. And that creates a society that doesn't complete the full spectrum of folks that we need to have the whole village, as you would say. So what does that mean? Politically, the people in Central Marin, and particularly Larkspur, Corte Madera, and the Ross Valley, everyone likes the small towns that we have. We don't want to see massive development of large, low-cost housing projects. But there is clearly an opportunity to do something that isn't that, but that would create more housing opportunities, more second units, more density in certain areas, a little bit, not 30 units per acre, but certainly more than what we are permitting right now. I absolutely want to see first responders, teachers, nurses, all kinds of folks.
Seniors?
Well, Larkspur right now has just approved and is being built as we speak, a project on Doherty Drive that we call the Rose Garden Project, of which there will be 50 units for seniors, right downtown, walk to the shopping center and downtown and all the amenities that it has. We absolutely think that since Marin County is the oldest demographic county in the state, that we need to provide for seniors.
Yeah.
But my point is this, is I'm in favor of supporting more housing, not less. I don't want to draw the drawbridge here.
And just to be clear, nobody is proposing a new Marin city with exclusively zoned multiple dwelling units that are subsidized or aimed at low-income people.
When you say no one is proposing that, what I think people are opposed is where there's like infill development. Like, for example, I have clients up in Novato right now when I'm wearing my attorney real estate hat as opposed to a city council member. And there's going to be, and the folks in Novato that live in this long established neighborhood, there's an open parcel and there's going to be 30 units per acre being developed there, and there's issues of access and traffic and all the other things that go along with it. And so that's where people really kind of get their hackles up, is where you have established neighborhoods and you plop down a high density project right in the middle of it. I think that we can be creative in the way that we're doing this, and that's the issue. But in terms of ABAG and the fight, what happens is that the ABAG is a regional governmental body, obviously, and when local people really want to retain and protect local control. And so the problem is that ABAG sometimes uses data, so they impose quotas and numbers. They're called RHNAs, Regional Housing Need Allotments or Assessments. And so sometimes those numbers don't correlate very well with what's actually happening on the ground. And so most recently, before we had the recession, ABAG had some very large numbers, thinking that, oh, well, the Bay Area is going to grow by 2 million and jobs and all of this, and so we need to build all this housing for it. And it doesn't seem like that data is going to be supported, and that we're going to need less housing than that. But
so seating control, though, and I don't mean to cut you off, but
that's okay.
Seating control is always an issue in housing or even police and security services. Traditionally, Larkspur shared police services with Corte Madera. Mm-hmm. Recently, my understanding is San Anselmo merged in to form a new group, a Central Marin Police Department. How has that process been accomplished, and is it working well for the city, or are there control problems?
Well, I actually have some insight to that, since I'm the chair of the Central Marin Police Authority.
That's why I asked you.
Okay.
Holy moly!
Holy moly! And I can say it's working beyond our wildest dreams. It is highly successful. We have a rock star police chief in Todd Cusimano, and as well as the recently retired chief in San Anselmo. The two of them were the real architects, along with the city managers of each of the 3 towns, to help put this together. And effectively what has happened is, God forbid, we actually are providing more police and better services for less money.
Sounds like a win-win.
Right, which leads me to what one of my big issues on the city council is I'm in favor of shared services wherever they can be approached. Here we've done it with police, we're looking for it with fire, looking for it with public works, we're looking for it for any opportunity, because I think the 19th century model of little town or burg, then you had countryside, the next little town or burg. Well, last time I checked, they all merged together at this point, so really a shared service model makes much more sense to me.
Len, there's a lot of controversy about plans to rebuild the Highway 101 interchanges in Corte Madera. What's your opinion of the current plan, and how would you amend it based on the concerns you're hearing?
Well, there's very strong consensus against the current plan, and it primarily has to do with the freeway flyover and the amount of concrete and all of that, and we don't want Central Marin to look like Southern California interchange, and so I think that the design absolutely needs to be redone. What's really critically important is that Sir Francis Drake is a virtual parking lot at commute times, and this plan, the project, the way it's designed right now, doesn't get more cars moving along Drake and onto the freeway. Also, flooding, as we know, for decades is a problem in this area. It doesn't address the flooding issue. Another critical issue is how to get across the freeway. I'm in favor of making it easier for pedestrians and bicyclists to get across the freeway. In Larkspur Corte Madera Shared School District, we're building a new school that's going to be open in 2014. Some kids from the west side of the freeway are going to have to go to school on the east side. I want the kids to be able to walk and bike safely to be able to get there. This project doesn't address any of those concerns. So what I'm suggesting is the public process really did work well. What I do not condone is we had a recent meeting, joint council meeting of Corte Madera and Larkspur, in which the TAM board and staff was invited to come and present. And I do not think that they were treated very cordially or politely, because there were some errors by staff, not by staff, by some of the experts and consultants that TAM had hired. Mistakes are made. I applaud the people that have found them, but you don't need to grill people and make them feel uncomfortable because a mistake was made. Anyone can do that. What's really important is to try to build a consensus on what will work, not what is wrong with it.
And just to clarify, TAM is the Transportation Authority of Marin?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm always fascinated by the number of issues that every town in Marin County has, and I'm sure Larkspur has them too. What do you see as the issues in Larkspur that are pending now or important to you and the folks who live there, and what are your goals for getting some of the goals finished and done?
Sure. I mean, let me see how many fingers I have and see if I can get.
Sure.
But
you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how many fingers you got.
So I'll move through that quickly. As I mentioned, shared services is a big issue. How to more efficiently provide the services we have, and we can do it when we work cooperatively and collegially with our colleagues. Another issue, of course, is funding. Larkspur is considering a revenue measure that will go be presented to the council, and the council hopefully will approve, and will go on the ballot. And so there will be some revenue. That will be a tax of some sort. Yes, God forbid the magic T word. But that will go on, and the purpose of that will be to support 911 response, roads, potholes, and that sort of thing. Because right now we have, if we're not careful in Larkspur, we're balanced budget, but we have a potential structural deficit, meaning that our projected expenses exceed our projected income. And so we are very conservative and like to have a balanced budget in Larkspur because, unlike the federal government, we don't print money there. Mm-hmm. Another issue, of course, that my colleague Larry Chu on the Larkspur City Council champions is pension reform. And I don't want to demonize local government workers. They do a great job, but I'm just saying the way it's set up is something that is unsustainable and that we can't afford, so we have to move in reasonable increments towards a sustainable project, and I strongly support that. Another major issue in Larkspur is the Larkspur Community Facility parcel, where we're hoping to build some sort of a combination of a library and community center. And we are blessed to be able to have been dedicated the land and have this opportunity to build a building there that will be the last major public building in Larkspur for the next 100 years.
And in the meantime, can you just give free ebooks at coffee shops?
You can get ebooks at the existing Larkspur Library right now, and it happens to be the greatest little library in the world.
Len Rifkind on the City Council in Larkspur, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.